I told myself a story one day, and it began something like this. It was a story about myself approaching a man of great education, a man in what you would call the field of psychology or psychiatry, someone who works with some difficult cases. And the being I was speaking to, very well established, very well on an academic level, certainly high accolades, high awards, wealthy, and having accomplished much in this life. And as I looked upon him, I was introduced to him by a family member, and we sat around a round table and began a discussion about the difference between a person who channels a being with a name and brings forth knowledge that has really not been heard before, and the person who has an identity disorder, a multiple identity disorder, where they have an entity that takes over their current one and also has a name and has a personality and speaks at the level where they're at. I got to get a glimpse at one of these entities that he was chatting to me about, and the entity's name was Gary. Gary came through a middle-aged woman, and Gary was interesting, and the only thing that I would probably tell you about Gary is that he annoyingly just always wanted to crack his knuckles. And so I got a glimpse of one of these entities that the educated man, or in the psych man, I will call him, the academic, was speaking about in one of his clients. As we spoke, I tried to explain to him the difference and in the quality of the entities that came through someone who was channeling and someone who had multiple identity disorder. And as much as I probed and as much as I used every muscle in my conscious intellect to help this academic man, psych man, to see out of the box, to realize that there were vistas that were beyond what his training in his field were capable of, there was no way that I could help his consciousness to go further afield, to plow deeper into the unknown. And so as I looked at this, I realized that the only way that I could even attempt to make this journey with this man was to invite him to use his imagination. And I knew that the imaginative journey would allow me to bring analogies and metaphors forward so that I could show him a vista he had never seen and help him understand things. He agreed for me to tell him a story, and I knew this was a really wonderful way to awaken his imagination. I explained to him a land with a vista that went far into the distance, and in this land was a building. It looked a lot like a box that you would receive popcorn in at a movie theater. It seemed to be about 10 stories high. The top of the building seemed to be wider than the base, almost cartoonish. And I saw people scurrying back and forth from this box, this building, and they were gathering flowers. They were gathering beautiful blossoms from the surrounding areas, and they would pick them, and they would scurry back to the building. They seemed to be climbing up the sides, and it seemed like this building didn't have a roof. It was like an open box, very much to the popcorn box, yet It had all these hundreds of windows like a building. And they would throw these blossoms in the top, into the top of the building, into this box. And they would run down the side of the building and then go look for other blossoms in the surrounding areas. And they would pick them and, of course, return, climb up, scurry up, and go and throw them in. And when I went to go and have a look into this building, into this institution, into this academic place where all the knowledge and information was held, I looked in expecting to see a mountain of the most beautiful blossoms. But instead, what I saw were dead, wilted flowers. I invited the sightman then to take a journey with me, but it would mean he would have to leave the box building of his academic studies, his prowess, his strength, his knowledge. Very contained, very much institutionalized. And I promised him, I said to him, I'll make you one promise. I'll take you into a vista that you have never been in before. No one from your building has ever been in before. The blossoms that you have picked and placed within the knowledge, in other words, the nuggets, the learning tools, the information that you've placed within that building, within the box, that have turned into just dead information. I'll show you blossoms and I'll show you wisdom that no one in the box has ever seen before. But for me to do that, I will take you away over the hills into a vista where you will lose sight of the building, of what you've learned and everything you know. The danger is that you will never be able to return. But I can and do have long sight, and because I have long sight, I will keep my single eye upon that building, upon where you've come from. And my promise to you is this, that I will return you after we have seen the fields, been into the fields of infinity, and I will return you straight back there, even if you lose sight of it. In order for you to make this journey with me, of course, you'll have to believe me. That's the only thing the only price that you will have to pay is that you will have to believe that I will return you. Otherwise, everything that you encounter will just be for your benefit alone, a gift, let's say. You're going to have to trust me. And as we both stood by the building looking out and saw all the scurrying figures picking the flowers and leaping up and scurrying up the sides of this box building and throwing these dead blooms in where they wilted and withered, he agreed to take the journey with me. And in our consciousness, we left everything that he knew to be true, everything that he had never left the institution and the contained knowledge that he had studied through the various degrees, doctorates and professorships that he had gained, all the knowledge that he had. And by the level of the floor, at the very, very top windows of this building box, that's where he was, that's where his offices were, which indicated to me that in his field on a global level, he was really, really high up, which meant he also had a lot to lose. Then we take this journey, and we moved past the immediate landscape that was around the building. And I realized and saw that very few of these people who were gathering the information and nuggets were wandering past a certain, let's say, circumference. They were able to pick flowers of information and knowledge only from a certain circumference around this building box. Only certain flowers could be picked and thrown inside to be harnessed and used by the institution. We went past that ring, we went past that circumference. We entered into a beautiful meadow, lovely landscape, and he saw blooms and growths and lichen and grasses that his eyes had never lain upon, and he was intrigued. He was enchanted by some of the wisdom and the teachers and teachings and the knowledge that he was encountering through my eyes, through my imagination and the journey we were taking. Anyway, there was that point, and each time he looked back, he could certainly still see the place he had come from, the big building there in the distance. So there was a feeling that he was safe, that as long as he could place his eyes upon where he had come from, he was okay. But I did know at this point that while he still could lay eyes upon that building and where he came from, every blossom he would encounter, even if it was new, his primary thought would always be to pick that blossom and to return back to the building, scurry up and throw it inside. It would always be his default to take any piece of wisdom or knowledge learnt, fresh, new, alive, and capable of evolution and growth, and his knee-jerk reaction would be go and make sure that it fits in the box. Make sure that it fits within what is acceptable academically, what has a label, what has a place, if there's a file on it. And that was his primary objective whenever we encountered anything new in a blossom. It didn't matter how rare it was. He automatically wanted to take that piece of wisdom and make it go fit into what he had already learned. And so I knew that I had to take him further afield. I had to show him beyond what he could imagine in order for me to do that, which is why I made him the promise. We had to go past a range of hills or mountains. And going past this range of mountains, on the other side, once we had cleared the slope and entered a brand new valley, a valley never encountered before, once he looked back, the mountains would be in the way. And it meant that he would not be able to see the building box. In other words, in consciousness, as an analogy, he would not be able to, whenever he encountered anything in this new landscape, he would be unable to go and verify it in the institution, in what he had learned in the textbooks. He would be consciously incapable of comparison, of making it fit. For the knowledge that would come through in the new blossoms, there were no folders in the building, in the institution. There were none. There were no textbooks on the blossoms and the wisdom and the knowledge that was now held within this new valley. And the first one we encountered, when he had come to terms and didn't really quite realize that he didn't have access to what he always had known, that he didn't have access to the old informational storage device in his memories. When he encountered this new bloom, his instinctive reaction was to bend and pluck it, because he wanted to take it. He wanted to own it. He wanted it. He wanted to take it and go and place it in the building block box of his academic learning. And the incredible thing about it is the minute that he picked this particular bloom, and I remembered seeing it, it had the most incredible violet petals, something I had never, its rarity was pretty obvious. The minute he picked it, it withered in his hand and went even further. Not only withered, it broke down, disintegrated, and fell like dust between his fingers. And you could see the look of surprise upon his face. So he left my side and he wandered over to another bloom, similar one, and he picked it, thinking perhaps it was just a mistake with the first one. And the minute he picked it, it withered. Not only did it wither, it began to break down, turned to dust, decayed, and the dust fell between his fingers. And he looked at me. And this is what I said to him. There are types of wisdoms that you could come in contact with, that the only way that you can experience them, enjoy them, set sight upon that wisdom, is to never ever want to own it, pick it, keep it, have it, or contain it. That its true beauty, its true vibrancy and radiation, its magic, can only be experienced if it's not contained within a mind, if it's not put in a box, if it's not measured by what you've already learned, if the intellect does not cut it near the earth and try to place it, own it. If you can simply be in these fields, these infinity fields, and gaze upon that miraculous bloom without any thought of ownership, it is yours. This kingdom is yours. And you could come here at any time and gaze upon the most incredible blossoms of knowledge and wisdom that exist throughout the universe. But you can never pick it. You can never own it. You can never place it in memory. So the man turned to me, a little disappointed. The psych man turned to me a little bit disappointed and said to me, so what is the value then? If I come all this way into the fields, and I have access to the most spectacular blossoms that exist, truly radiating with immense power and magic, what is the point? Why would I do it if I cannot even take them home? And so I turned to the psych man and I said to him, you would come out into these fields not to own any of the wisdom or the blossom, but to gain upon them, to look upon them, and to allow them to impact you, to allow them to change you. They will give you life. They will give you magic. They will change you. You cannot make these journeys into these infinity fields and not be changed. There's nothing you can do here, nothing you can own here, nothing you can say. Everything you once were contained in that building and box mean nothing in these fields. All you can do is simply be. Simply gaze upon the most incredible wisdom and allow it to change you, and it will. There seemed to be a light that switched on in his eyes. There was something minuscule that he did grasp, even if it was just for a fleeting moment. And I knew that our reason for moving into the field of infinity had come to an end. And I knew it was time that he was returned to where he had come from. And I knew full well that he would return back to his institution, his academics, his box, his building. But he would be different, for you cannot gaze upon the blooms of the fields of infinity without being changed to some degree within your being. Inside you were changed. And I knew that he would go back. And I knew that he would not be able to be that same person anymore. And that would unfold in his life. It would make changes. And he would change. Perhaps only he would change. Perhaps he would make changes within the building, the box. Perhaps he would change some things. Perhaps he would tell others about the fields of infinity. Perhaps he would share with colleagues that thinking out of the box is so necessary for the change within the human, any human. And that really most of the information, wisdom, and knowledge that's gathered from the surroundings around any person in whatever form that is placed within the containment of the intellect, of the consciousness, of the academic, of the normal person, it dies. It withers and dies and becomes dead information. And so I looked, and I looked through the mountain with my single eye, and I could see the institution of the box, the building. He could not see through the mountains. He did not know his way home. So consciously and through consciousness I guided him. And we moved in the right direction. And we got to one of the circumferences, and suddenly he could see his building box and where he had come from. He was coming back to himself, we could call it that. His memories were flooding in, his training, his studies, his degrees, his doctorates were all flooding in. And his whole field, his whole building of who he was returned and got closer and closer to him. Now I returned him to the doorway of that building box, while those around us were scurrying up and down the walls, picking blooms, throwing them inside. And I could see him stop and watch some of the workers that were scurrying to gather information, to build the building so that they could build another level higher, because the more blooms and information they gathered, the higher the structure went, until it was forming this interesting top-heavy tower. And I knew there and then that his thought processes were about to change. He was about to contemplate what he had seen, what he had encountered. I left him at that door. I greeted him. I had no idea if I would encounter the psych man again. No idea. I did not need to. It was unnecessary. He had seen and witnessed something that had a life of its own. It would change him. It would touch him. It would move him. It did not need me to interfere. And so I end that tale. I thought it would be an interesting one, an interesting adventure into consciousness. It can be applied in so many different places and in so many different ways. And I guess from my part, it is also an invitation. It is an invitation to you to leave the box, to think out of the box, and to allow yourself to be carried away, at first by your imagination, into the fields of infinity. Thank you.